optimization point, you stifle innovation. This is really important, particularly if you're a mother with kids, because the kids these days don't have as much social interaction and play with other kids as they used to. They spend more time behind computers and social media, and they get often an inflated sense of themselves, and then they come into the real world and boom. And so how do you say no, and how do you say no in a way that respects people? How do you say no in a way that doesn't destroy innovation or morale? That's what we're going to be talking about today. I've been around negative people all my career. I'm sure you have too. And I used to think the people who said no all the time were negative personalities, and it was like I would call them a negative personalities. Like I solved the problem. I defined you as a negative personality. Good, my job is done. And as I got more experience, I said it's not as simple as personality. Sometimes people are in jobs that require them to be negative. For example, one of the most negative jobs that I know is to be a physician, because the whole culture of medicine is negative. How many of you have ever had a blood test? And you come back and the doctor says, John, your test was negative. And you got to, what? Negative? Oh, negative is positive. And that's because when they were looking at your blood sample, they're looking for bad things. And when you have a physical exam, what's the doctor doing? He's looking for problems. And the whole medical profession is a very negative profession. And one of the issues I deal with as a consultant is that some of these physicians then become promoted as managers. They don't know how to turn off the negativity. And they manage people in a negative way. And you can imagine the dysfunction associated with that. Other jobs that you all know that are negative, lawyers. Tell me of a positive lawyer you've ever met. Most of them, if you bring a problem, they're going to tell you what could possibly go wrong. Accountants, particularly auditors, regulatory people. They've all got jobs that are very negative oriented. So they may be positive people, but their job requires them to be saying no a lot of times. And then finally, something I learned after 14 years in higher education. Somebody wrote a book about anybody from higher education here? And somebody wrote a book about higher education. The title of the book is, Whatever It Is, I'm Against It. And I think it summarizes the culture of higher education and some of the problems in higher education. And I used to think about the people who were always negative, who were always telling me what's wrong with this picture, who always would grade students about, X, they had the red pen and they're always looking to do X, as negative people. I've since come to realize, no, they have a negative tradition, and they're honoring their negative tradition. And that negative tradition is called the Enlightenment. Because it used to be back in the medieval days, the Pope would say, I'm God's representative, and this is the way it should be done. And the king would say, I'm God's representative, and this should be done. You oppose me, you're opposing God. And the Renaissance came and said, are you sure? Is that right? And they introduced something that hadn't been introduced before, and that's skepticism. And the whole idea of the Enlightenment is about skepticism. And basically the scientific method is skepticism. And a lot of people who are very negative are really just carrying on a tradition of being skeptical about everything, being pains in the ass, of course, but that is a tradition. It's not not necessarily their personality. So, how do you deal with this? How many of you have ever been to a doctor's office and seen this chart? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, everybody in the room has seen this, right? And here's the way it used to be. What's your name again?
Anna.
Haley?
Anna.
Anna? I would go to Anna and I'd say, Anna, are you in pain? Anna says, yes, I'm in pain. Oh, let me give you this medicine. And I give you this medicine to deal with the pain, and 6 months later you're addicted to it. Or I go to John, and John's a big he-man American, and I say, John, are you in pain? And John says, no. And so I don't give him anything. Today we have this chart, and so I could say, Anna, give me your level of pain. And you say, I'm in pain. I'm at level 3. Oh, I'm so sorry, Anna. Here, take this thing called an aspirin and call me in the morning. So I can triage the medication in a more precise way, because instead of asking a binary question, are you in pain? Yes, no. I can ask an ordinal question, give me a number from 0 to 10. Does that make sense? And it's the same when you are giving feedback to someone. Instead of saying, I don't like this idea, you can say, on a scale of 0, which is, where did you come up with this idea, to 10 is that we should adopt it tomorrow. I'm about a 4 on this. Can we work together to make it a 6? I don't think it's going to be a 10, but I think we can work together, maybe make it a 6 or 7. And if it's a 6 or 7, I can present it to my superiors. Here's another example. Anna comes home, and how old are your children, Anna?
3 and 12.
Okay, you're a 12-year-old. Did you do your homework? Well, that's a binary question. And I bet I know the answer. Yes. Which is, leave me alone. Right? Another way of saying that is, okay, on a scale of 0, which is I haven't opened the book, to 10, it's done. Where are you on your homework? And so by reframing the issue from a binary into an ordinal one, you get more dialogue. And you're not necessarily rejecting the person or you're rejecting the idea, but you're basically putting it in an ordinal framework. The other thing that this does, it forces you to talk about the idea and not the person. Because if I'm going to reject John's idea, I want to make it clear it's the idea that I'm rejecting, not the person named John. And so by framing it this way, I'm forced to say, instead of saying, I don't like this idea, John, that's a terrible idea. I'm forced to say, John, on a scale of 0 to 10, I think this is a 5 idea. I could see the idea as positive and negatives. I'd be willing to work with you to make it a 7. If it's a 7, I can present it to my higher-ups. If we can't get it to a 7, I can't justify it. In other words, we take the person out of the idea, just focus on the idea. Does that make sense? Another technique that I would suggest is called the wearing my hat technique. And I'm coaching someone who is a assistant to the CEO of a well-known company. And she has a very difficult job because she's often having to say no to vice presidents. And they get angry at her for saying, so I'm teaching her the wearing my hat technique. So let me give you a very good example. There is a conference in the Bahamas, and the CEO has designated the senior vice presidents are going to go in the private plane, and everybody else goes in commercial airlines. And so the vice presidents who are not the senior vice presidents are upset, and they go to the CEO's chief of staff. And the more she tries to explain the policy, the more they get angry at her. Because she's telling them, you can't do this. She's telling him, you can't. But the wearing my hat technique, she can say, look, personally, as Larry Stybel, as far as I'm concerned, I'd love to see you on the plane. I'd love to see everybody flying on the corporate jet. Or I'd like to see nobody flying on the corporate jet and everybody flying commercial airlines. Yeah, I think it'd be a lot easier if it was done. That's me personally. In my role as chief of staff, I have to communicate the CEO's decision to you. And that decision may not be one that I personally believe in, but it's my job to communicate that decision, and that's the decision. So what I'm doing is I'm wearing two hats. Here's another common way in business. As an executive in this company and as a shareholder in this company, I think this idea has a lot of value, and I'm very excited about it. As the general counsel of this company, who is responsible for the legal compliance, I have a concern about X, Y, and Z. By using the wearing my hat technique, I can basically say two completely different things at the same time, but I'm just clear about where I'm coming from. Any questions about this? So now it's time.
One question.
Anna, okay?
Must you mean it? In other words, taking your example of, I'm so excited by this idea, and, if my hands weren't tied, but what if you're not?
I think it depends on the situation. I think if it was a parent talking to a child, I wouldn't go for that kind of duplicity. That it doesn't build a positive relationship. On the other hand, if this is a board meeting and the board wants to focus on a particular area, and I'm the general counsel and I'm in the board meeting and I'm going to be telling the board members this is not a good idea, I might want to make it a little easier on myself by not being Mr. No.
Is there also a risk of undermining the CEO in your plane example? Meaning that it gets back to the CEO that you said that I really don't agree with that.
Well, in this particular case, the assistant to the CEO doesn't have the authority to make the decision about who gets on the plane and who doesn't get on the plane. Everybody knows it's the CEO's decision.
Yeah, I'd just be worried that there's a backlash to that.
But
But you could give it a shot.
yeah.
Then you're fired. Right?
And yeah.
I said, John's giving you a 5 on that.
So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like 3 of you over here, and I'd like 3 of you over here, and I'd like to think about the last 90 days, and can you think about a situation where you've had to say no to someone? And could any of these techniques that we've been talking about, wearing my hat or the framing it in an ordinal fashion, might have been of helpful, or maybe it wouldn't have been of helpful. And again, for people who are watching this on Zoom, can you break them up into teams, and let's do 10 minutes. All right. So the issue is this: we've been talking about two techniques that you can use. Technique number one is called framing the issue in an ordinal way, not a binary way, 0 to 10. The second issue is using the wearing my hat technique, which is, in my role as this, I would say this. In my role of that, I would have to say this. Can you think about the last 90 days in a situation, either home or at work, where any of those tools could have been of value to you?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah.
Having been in this position many a time, what if the idea has absolutely no merit? It's zero.
Okay.
Then what do you do?
My first thought is, if this is a business situation and somebody presents me something that has absolutely zero merit, I have to ask myself, what's the matter with me that I hired this guy? Maybe there's some. Maybe I need. All right. Suppose your boss presents an idea you think has absolutely no merit. Again, I would hold if it's that bad of an idea. What's wrong with me that I chose to work for this guy who thinks this way? If I really think it's a zero, if I can't think of that it deserves at least a 1 or a 2, my first thought is, I'm with the wrong people. I need to change the people I'm with, or I'm missing something. Now, I could see very well presenting a very incomplete, bad idea that you might say, it's a 3. I could see if I stand on one foot and maybe it could be positive under rare situation. If I gave it a 3, then I think I'm more likely to say, I would give this a 3 or 4, which, as a normal reaction, when somebody hears anything less than 4, that's basically, this is not worth it. If you're going to say to a subordinate, I think it's a 5 or 6, maybe there's something here we can work on. But if it's a 3, you're basically saying 0. But if you really think it's a 0, you got to look at the mirror. Why are you here?
But how about just someone who has a zillion ideas and some are good and some are bad, and it could be that, right? Maybe.
Yeah, if it's somebody who's got a zillion ideas, fine. I mean, again, I think this is very industry specific, and in a lot of the industries that I work in, which are technology companies, it takes a long time and very expensive to turn an idea into something. And so people don't throw around lots of ideas.
It seems to me your 0 not working for somebody is a long term, that's a whole nother story. And if somebody came to me with an idea of 0, I would never say that. I would say it sounds more like a 3, and it needs a lot of work to get somewhere. And if you think it's worth the work, I'm willing to consider it or work with you.
Fine.
But I wouldn't, why tell them 0
No, I
Lie and tell them it's three.
I know that's if you came to me with an idea and I thought it was a 0, I probably wouldn't tell you it's a 0.
Right.
I would be asking myself, why am I hanging out with this guy? If this is the quality of the ideas that he gets. If you're presenting me with ideas that I consider 3, to me that's just a bad idea. And I probably wouldn't want to work with you on that. If you present me an idea that I think is a 4 or 5, I might say, I could see there's some value here, and it needs work. I'm willing to work with you on that, and that's genuine. But if you present me an idea and I think this idea is 0, I got to say, why am I hanging out with this guy?
Yeah, but when you give him the 0, the why am I hanging out with this guy is not an answer to him.
No, I'm what I would verbally say, probably politically, is that I think it's a 3.
You can't say no.
Yeah,
Absolute no.
right. But would you just talk with each other about things in your life where this could or may not be appropriate? So I'll give you 10 minutes.
Well, that's specific.
You wanna roll around first?
Sure.
Chairs and stuff.
First reaction.
Are you going to join us?
I'm gonna try to figure out these guys.
What I've learned is
So,
if I
So I
want
think
to
it's pretty funny because I use that,
do
I'm
something.
wearing my hat for this, and I'm wearing my hat for this all the time. In fact, I just, when we were doing something, I said,
Here are the
I'm wearing my resident hat, and now I'm going to switch over, here's my reporting hat, so you know that these are like, this is me, and this is what I wear when I'm on the top. So this is not something I'm used to, but I do like the idea of giving care to, and I say that as someone who worked in R&D, where we're always throwing ideas, and what happens is,
Yeah,
there's like
And then you let it go.
multiple things that have to work,
Right.
and one of them,
Hey,
one
then
of
I'll
those
just-
ideas is dead, because that one idea
try to.
with the
But
rest
it
of
comes
it
back and you
has
still like it.
now killed your project, because you
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
get past
Will
it,
come
right?
back to
It goes
me.
back in the
Yeah,
hopper,
sometimes.
so
No,
you
I
put
was
it out in
thinking,
like a year
and
or
it goes
5
back to
years,
you and
and
you
try it again if things have changed.
Yes.
But
But
I'm
you
the
were
one
the one
that
who
I'm
put it
okay
out
with.
there.
It isn't
This way. Let's do this way. Have you thought
a
about,
kid trying to
you
tell
kind
me
of
something.
open like that?
Yeah.
And
I'm
they say
more
no,
thinking through the
because that
work
isn't a
lens
sick
now.
reaction of people I know.
I haven't, it's too much to try
The
to
idea, I
think
find
about
it
both scenarios. I don't think they're
Find that what?
exactly the same.
remarkable, but I've
Because
learned from
I
it.
don't have
I think
to
Sharon comes to me for
quarterly
I say no.
assess my kids and decide whether I'm gonna give them promotions or keep them around.
Sharon comes to me,
I gotta
yeah,
keep them around.
why don't
So
you do this, or
it's
why
just,
don't you
it's
do
quite
that? And I
different.
say no.
And I'm not
And she
being
backs
judged
off.
by anyone
She leaves it
to
alone,
make
lets
sure
it
my,
settle.
it's more my
And
own
it
with my
works
kids.
because
But I'm being judged
I
for how I manage
think
my
about it
team and how they perform.
and
So
realize
it's just a different level of
that's such a bad idea.
expectations. Yeah, I really like it.
I've something to think about, I haven't thought.
I really like, because my big problem in my
Because if I
PhD
just
is,
this is
because
what
I work with designers,
His instinct is no.
is
I
that
don't know
they
why,
often
but
have
it's a
half-baked
black-white thing.
ideas that
And
sound
we really
good,
agree on
but they
same
haven't thought
goals,
through
feel
all
the
the type
same
of
way about everything.
complications.
But it is that funny.
And that's not to say that the designs
Let's
themselves
go
have
to
to
the
take
next
technical implications, but for you to
Okay, I'll go.
design something
But
that's going to work, you have to understand what the limitations are and
How
find
to
a way
deal
through
with that
it
kind of personality.
by, being decent about and thoughtful enough to be shy.
And which I
And what I often find is,
I had someone
hand wavy, and then
ask me
AI,
to,
we will do this. And
ask to
I'm
look at
always
me
very
outside.
like, no, you're going to need to explain where this is going.
I really
And
like
how that's going to work. That's not sufficient to wave your hands and to say, magic, magic, tech, tech. So that's, so I really like the frame of, this is a good start.
ask me to do this.
This is an interesting start. I wouldn't have to say good, I would say interesting start, compelling start. I will try to find something in there that I think is compelling, as is specific. I like this aspect because
Yeah.
I'm not so certain about this aspect. Can I ask you to keep pushing over here and maybe leave this aside? like, I feel like
That's
we're
a
at a
level
3,
three
let's
idea,
see where you
level
can
four
go,
idea.
see me next
Right.
week, let's see.
But
I
I
love
can
the
work-
idea, I would have loved to
And
have
then
done
if I see some
That's the whole
bad,
thing,
like,
it's just a
rotten
level four.
aspect,
Can we work together?
I'm just a little
Exactly.
set
Fine,
aside,
maybe 6 or 7
If it was a 10, I
So
would have
why
just
don't you go
focusing
over it?
energies, because I know that if
I
I
mean, the thing
direct
is, I
it in
would
the
have
right
loved to
place,
have done
they'll
it.
probably
I really just
abandon that
didn't
thing
anyway.
anyway.
So
It'll die on the vine.
it was a no, but it
But
was
if
a
it's not
10,
me,
I
someone
would
else
like
will
to
kill it.
Yeah.
An engineer will most definitely kill it. That's like, but I really like the scale, because it, rather than me saying, that's such an incomplete thought, like, you barely thought about it, which is definitely over here. I'm over here
I
going,
mean, I had a guy who worked for me who was brilliant.
I'll be like, good start.
He was so
Let's
different
see
from
what
me,
else
who
we can
makes
do here.
decisions quickly. I'm an
This is
engineer.
helpful for
I
me
make
to be
decisions quickly
even
under a
more
lot of time.
positively
And
reframing.
a lot of
and
time
looking
when
at
I'm working, I make the best decision I can within that time, and I don't worry about it.
I'm curious
When
about
I would
your
ask
zero,
him to
or
do something,
what
he'd say,
you were
let me
thinking
think about
about.
it, I'll get back to you in a couple of days.
Um,
And he'd come back.
I know,
very
career-wise,
thorough.
I
If
have-
I pushed him for an answer at
I
that
have
point in time, he could not break it
set
down.
issues.
So in effect, in some ways,
I
you
ran
don't have to come back right away with a no. You can say, I want to think about it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's,
So,
I think,
and that included IBM and Lotus.
it gives you a chance to answer,
the
because
issue
most of these
isn't-
things do not have an immediate response.
That's
That's
3 or
Yeah.
0, because
Yeah.
that's gonna set your history.
No.
He wants something in the last 90 days. I had
What your
projects that I ran
I'm doing.
where I had a plan and
The problem
the sales department wanted me
is
to
that
sell.
there's
When I
limited,
wasn't sure the project was gonna be ready.
large software companies,
We had to
there's limited
negotiate
set of
back and forth,
resources.
so that it wasn't
There is
so much
an
a discussion whether
external
it was a good
factor
idea.
that most
But the
engineers, for example, have no
introduction
idea
date
about. That
Yeah.
is
constantly, I mean, I had a plan, a very careful plan, and then I added a
What
month
is the
because I
large
knew something
scale
was
picture of how do
contingency,
all
but
your
I had no
products
idea what it
integrate
was.
together?
So
as
they,
opposed
I
to
said,
focusing on
December,
Just do that one
expecting to
piece.
have it ready by
Yeah.
November.
And it
took
gets to
my
be, okay,
plan and said, I'm gonna work
There's
on November,
20
and got in
eight
trouble,
ideas.
because I wasn't ready in November. I was hoping it was, I scheduled to move out in
Which ones
November.
you gonna do?
Right, you have to actually
And
pick
how,
one.
But I don't
how are
think it
you
quite
gonna
fits
tell
with
the guy that's got a really good idea?
But I
That
had
just
that
doesn't fit
conflict.
in
Well,
with
you
the
anticipate.
strategy that we have as a
You
company.
I anticipated based on my
So-
experience.
Yeah.
And that usually
I thought it
results
was
in a
more
conversation
dangerous
about,
in not having
You've gotta-
got everybody set up
you've
and
gotta
putting
expand
all
your
this stuff in motion.
horizons
Yeah.
yourself.
And having
as
it
part of
early
management,
and delivering it
executive training,
somewhat
etc.,
later
to grow
to
your
their
own
detriment because
ideas
it had
about
benefits and
at a
bonuses.
much larger
But no one
scale
said to
than
you,
what
no,
you're presenting.
oh, we can't wait that long.
It's too narrow.
Nobody said,
They
oh,
said-
we can't wait.
So,
We'll be stopping in about 4 minutes. 4-minute warning.
I'm gonna put all the plan together because that's what your thing says. I was honest.
I think the changes with the scale
The
of
stuff I needed.
So they,
I could have put a plan together and,
Yeah, totally.
you know, kept extending so
And the
that it really showed up
tolerance
in December, which
for-
I did not do.
You know,
Okay, but they gave you
experimentation,
the
like to
no.
your point, you didn't have, you couldn't go, let's do these and see what sticks.
Well,
You would
Yes.
pick.
They gave me a no.
so
interesting.
they would have been better.
Well, they
if
gave me an
not.
early yes.
So, I am an experimenter. I mean, that's why,
But I do think the,
when I live,
the way to
that's why I
answer
think
stuff
this
is on
business
the
is so
scale of 1 to
great,
10.
because everything
Really
changes
does
every
work.
day.
When I
What's
feel
going
like
on now, as you've seen the whole stuff.
Do you get that all the time when you go to the doctor? What's your
No.
pain,
You
what's
go,
your
man,
renal?
what
No.
great business.
My
And
doctor
it has
is
its own
regular
bonds
PT
for
also.
60 years. You know,
What
it's
level
like,
are you at?
how can you
Go through
possibly?
that. I never sort of
Nothing
smile.
changes in that.
Yeah,
And
right.
so
Level from
this
1 to
all
10, where are you?
changes, and
Yes, the doctor gets a better idea.
right, I'm just, I use that example, because one of my friends did that. And he was the one that told me,
Maybe not.
can you believe that I did this?
Doctor-patient
You know,
relationship is sort of a
Um,
prescription.
How do
So
you,
that's where they use it a lot.
Yeah.
how do you
yeah.
cut it? Because you'd like to do, really experiment with a lot of these ideas, but you can't do it.
You work in deadlines when you're publishing?
You literally have the job to
No,
say
no,
no.
rarely.
And that is an
Even to good
uncomfortable
ideas, right?
position.
You're not a
That's what I'm saying,
conflict
even to
can't do
good.
it.
When you're working your
It's not
poetry.
just about
And so when
good.
you
No,
have that
well, I'm,
experimentation
in
that,
terms of
you
my,
know, contrary to what I said, was, you know, yeah, you gotta follow the,
literally 10, 12 hours.
you know, what the corporation strategy is. It's that strategy. that is
Very, very
30
part
years
time,
old
which is fine, so, you know.
that are new projects that nobody's really been
No,
thinking
well,
about.
I've
When
done
you
some,
think about their existence.
To me, it's a
No,
time box problem, like setting up and saying, okay,
yeah,
you've got 2 weeks to get this from
basically
3
what I do
to a
right
7.
now is I do
And if you
Okay. Wow. One minute warning. 1 minute warning.
Your part's not gonna work.
Which is maybe why which is maybe why they tend to be unpopular.
There's like clearly things that come up, which drives me crazy when I watch stuff in town, because we do not have the clarity in pretty much anything, right? And you're like,
Institution, media, healthcare, whatever.
Were you there?
which plant, the last one was 29. Yeah. So,
And they couldn't have a microphone
No,
for it?
basically, it's.
Were you there?
Okay, time's up. Why don't y'all stand up and just stretch a little bit? You've been sitting down for a long time. Just stand up and stretch.
Good for your brain.
All right, yeah. All right. All right, that's enough fun. Sit down, sit down, sit down. Okay. Let's next slide. So we've been talking about the what do you say and using the ordinal framework or using the wearing my hat framework. And now we're going to be talking about the architecture of the environment that you're going to be saying the no in. And the typical architecture in business looks something like this, where there's a boss who's got a chair, and then the subordinate is on the other side of the desk. And of course, that whole concept leverages the power differential between the parties. Next slide. One of the most powerful things that you can do as a boss and as a parent, particularly with a 16-year-old, is, weather permitting, say, let's take a walk. And the nice thing about taking a walk is you're moving shoulder to shoulder, you're moving together, and you're not looking at each other's face. And so the person can't read what's on your facial expression. They have to look straight ahead. And you can't read their facial expression. So it allows for more comfort. And if we're going to be discussing a difficult thing, let's take a walk around the parking lot. Let's take a walk in the woods. Let's just take a walk and just enjoy the time. Even on days like today, there are some times that are sunny and quite pleasant. But the idea is take a walk and have that conversation while walking shoulder to shoulder. Next slide. And if you can't go outside, another thing is, instead of doing the typical boss-subordinate thing where you're sitting across from someone, sit on the same side with them shoulder to shoulder. And then, particularly in business, if somebody's brought you a plan, an idea, a proposal, look at the proposal together. The most dramatic example that I had was that I was dealing with the head of pathology lab for a Harvard teaching hospital that had tremendous turnover among employees in the lab, because the head of the pathology lab was so negative and so sarcastic. And we would have a conversation, and what he would do is he would sit on his chair, which was a nice, big, high-back chair, and he would basically tell the subordinate that the subordinate was stupid, and the subordinate would cry, and then eventually the subordinate would leave. And I just said, don't sit in that chair, sit shoulder to shoulder with the person, look at the report together, and say, here's what I like about the report, here's where it could be improved, let's work together to improve it. And turnover went down to average for pathology labs in Boston, just by the simple changing of the position.
When I was at Polaroid, the culture at Polaroid was to have a meeting. My day would typically be 5 one-hour meetings, and I drank a cup of coffee each meeting, which, as an aside, did me no good whatsoever. But we always sat at a rectangular table, and some years into it, I discovered that on my own. And when you have a multiple group of people, especially when you all want to talk and all have different ideas and you're covering different problems, because they tend to be a problem or a staff meeting, always sit next to the person you don't want to have a fight with. And it works, you just don't have it. You don't have one of these. You're always talking to people, you know, I mean, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to everybody else around. The same thing happens in meetings. It was just amazing how effective that particular item is.
I had a situation, I was working with Harvard Teaching Hospital. It was a board of directors, and there were these physicians. And the physicians would sit together on one side of the table. And then there were the business types, and they would sit on the other side of the table together. And then you get this situation where the business people would say, well, why don't we? And then the physicians, well, you can't because. Well, why don't we? No, you can't because. Finally, the business types say, to hell with you, and they say, this is the vote. And the president was caught in the middle because the physicians have to implement the thing that they disagreed with, and the president has to answer to the board for it. It was totally dysfunctional. Could I help in that dysfunctional situation? Yeah. I mandated that the physicians sit next to someone they don't like. And what are we going to talk to? What am I going to talk to them about? The Red Sox, the Patriots, the weather, politics, anything you want. But the idea is to get to know this person as a person, not just as the terrible person on the other side of the table. Shoulder to shoulder, not across.
Were there any people that were clamoring to sit next to one person because everybody disliked him?
Yes. Next. So, think about some interactions you've had in your career where there was a physical issue here about who was sitting where, who was across the table versus shoulder to shoulder, where maybe a walk in the woods might have helped, or sitting shoulder to shoulder might have helped. Let me give you 5 minutes to talk with each other about the physicality of saying no, and how do you position yourself when saying no. And again, if you have children, taking a walk is a very good idea because the kids don't want to be sitting, listening to mother or father berate them. And eventually they just say, yes, Mom, you're absolutely right, Mom. And they don't mean it, and you know they don't mean it, and then you get angry and ba. Whereas if you take a walk and you're not looking at each other, you can be more honest. So 5 minutes, go into your teams and just discuss this issue.
Once in a while we sit side by side, it doesn't really seem to make a difference.
After I did promise that I was done,
In that situation,
which was like another month and a half of work, which got me in trouble with the company I was supposed to go work for.
didn't
you have no control over like, getting out, because you have to have them sign off on it?
Necessarily, you know, if I'm showing them
And
something
so,
in writing,
I just remember
they'll
sitting there
know.
thinking, I can't do this anymore.
But I don't.
But it's definitely that
seem to really,
on the side. I
just trying
can't
to
think of
figure
anything that where,
make a
I guess I
difference.
normally sit next to people.
I had to say no very
You
early
know, side by side.
My issue
A
is that
parent
my
wanted
kids
to
on
put
Zoom
their-
and work remotely,
at
so
school.
there isn't really
And there's a
a
little
way to, well,
from
there's just, it's us that's in front of each other in a screen, there's no,
three teachers.
there's no option to walk or
Yeah,
sit a different way.
And she was just
Well, I can also tell you that, I don't know if this works or
my
not,
son's
but I
best
mean,
friend.
I tend,
It
because
is
of
so
the way my house is
important.
set, so I've got a big
She
screen
knows his
here, and I
kids
do my
and
work on
whatever.
there, but I also have the
You know,
iPad, and a lot of
everybody's-
times, people are talking while they're reading, and I'm still doing here, and then I'll turn around, look at them, and I'll go back, and then so I'm doing both, because I'm doing both things.
Yeah.
So it's not side by side, but it's also kind of,
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, I know that, but it's one of those like, I can't,
I was facing,
Yeah, right.
be consistent
I
at
don't
the
think
same
so.
time, so,
Yeah, probably not.
I have an anti-example, but that's because I have a very combative boss. I think it's
Oh, really?
cultural
and so as a
in
result,
terms of like, I
was
just
allowed
think this
to
is
have
just
20
her
of my children.
personality.
which meant
Her
extra
personality is,
income
you know that like class A, yes, and they talk
Wasn't
about
that
that in
amazing?
comedy.
That was like my very first no,
and,
and, you know, and I thought it was
the idea with improv is that it's only funny and it's only good
You know, it worked out
when
beautifully.
whatever one comedian
Better
throws
than
out, the
another
other one
time.
picks it up and then adds something else to it. And the argument is button and
I took over school.
because you're saying this, but also this other thing, but you're saying it in a more positive way, an additive way, right? This is, so, and I remember learning about it and experiencing it and realizing just like, oh, you really have to catch yourself because by saying,
I mean, I don't really know.
no but, you're only making it worse.
Way with everyone's from
And you're really not adding that much. You could still add your thing without negating the thing that came for you. She's exactly that. She's always negating, even when she thinks your idea is good. She will spend an hour arguing, and then at the very end, right as you're hanging up, she'll be like, yeah, but that was good, that was good.
Now,
Keep going with that.
I've done it
And you're like, what did I just experience? I just went for an hour
I think I would
thinking that I did it all wrong,
conversation with her and explain.
when in fact she just needed to fight me. I was so
And
just the amount of times that happened. And so the other day we were actually
My
in
limit is
physical, we
3,
did a
and she's
workshop,
not 3, and so I
and she asked me to take a walk with her to go get lunch.
2-minute warning, everyone. 2-minute warning.
And she argued about a use case. I had brought 3
we
use
never
cases
had
for
that
us to like, try to do designs against.
Yeah.
And I said, I think we should do that one, and she was like, absolutely not, it should be the southern one.
Living it again.
And I was like, well, I mean, that one's good too. Here's why I think this one would be a
Well,
little bit
one
more
or two things
robust.
would happen, we would have talked,
Why are we trying to do this?
face to face, we would have had the walk.
Yelled the
And
entire
maybe
way,
I
and I
would
was
have
like,
changed my mind.
all right, I tried to like,
I would have changed my mind.
then I was like, all right, I'm giving up.
Or she would have
Come back in
understood
the room, and someone else says one thing
When I was
about
counseled
the use
to do
case
what?
two, the one, and she was like, yeah, that's great, let's do it.
Change their mind, and I presume telling the
And
world.
so even the walk didn't help this one. So I'm just
I mean,
wondering,
but
I
either
agree,
way,
I
I didn't
think
give it
the
a
walk
chance.
is fantastic. I do think people's get
And
hard
it
to
was my
party
first
and,
year on that job.
but there are just some people that I wonder.
I didn't know enough.
isn't the president not really
what
prepared,
he's
they're
saying.
thinking everything out?
I do, she's a very external, definitely an externalizing
Thinking, so
thinker.
like, you get to listen to all
1 minute. 1 minute left.
and you're like,
You know,
yeah,
you go to
okay.
school,
I
for
can
example,
manage that
and
if it wasn't,
depending on where you are,
if it wasn't.
September
You know,
30th
I
is
can,
the day,
I'm
or June
also,
30th,
I
and
know,
you may miss by one
but
day
it's
and be
not,
here.
not letting me
Yeah,
read
right.
everything
Picked out.
about you,
You say, well, that's crazy.
get my own
If you
thing
don't
in,
have that,
and then change my mind
where
and
do you,
gaslight you.
what do you do?
Pretend I know,
So-
it wasn't your idea in the first.
No, maybe,
So
maybe
there's
that's
also,
right.
there's some people who, it's
Well, it's like,
I
legal
like I
drinking
totally buy
age,
into
you know.
this idea. I just wonder if some people
11:59,
are beyond.
You know,
Can't drink.
but 12:01, you're fine, you know? If it's your birthday.
Exactly.
And I did that on my birthday when I was turned 21.
There used to be a thing, it's just an artificial, arbitrary date, which you sort of need to keep society running. On the other hand,
Okay, please wrap up your conversations, and we're going to summarize and be done.
I think that's one of those things you learn. You know, that was in the I learned little things about it.
All right, could you let's just wrap up now. Next slide, please. So basically, that's the program. We talked about. First part of it was what do you say, and again, I was suggesting try to avoid a binary way of framing the problem, but try to talk in terms of 0 to 10. And basically, if it's a 0, you got to ask yourself, what am I doing here? What's wrong with me that I hired this person? If it's a 2 to a 4, it really is you don't like the idea, and it'll be received as you don't like the idea. If you could say it's a 4 to a 6, maybe it's got some potential. And again, I think anything from 8 and up is positive. I think that's how people will interpret that. But the idea, and again, the image I want you to have in mind is going to your doctor and seeing the pain chart and understanding that that pain chart allows for a more precise prescription to be done from a medical point of view. And it's the same with feedback. The more you can frame things from an ordinal point of view, the more precise you can be, the more you can have a conversation. The second thing we talked about is wearing my hat. And again, that's when people have, if they genuinely do feel caught between two places. Again, I see this a lot with lawyers where the business side of the lawyer would say yes, and the legal side of the lawyer is going to say something else. And it's just fine to articulate both. Then finally, we talked about the structure of saying no. And the structure of a typical office reinforces the hierarchical nature of a relationship. And my suggestion is shoulder to shoulder. If possible, weather permitting, go for a walk. Particularly if the proposal you're going to be rejecting is something very important to the individual. If weather is not permitting, then I would sit shoulder to shoulder on the same side of the table and have that discussion. At this point, let me ask any questions, comments, concerns? So, thank you very much. And again, if anybody would like a copy of these slides, feel free to email me. I'll be glad to send you the copy.